This is the Red Podcast.
It's Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts. I hope you reach, expand, and develop your audience. And we're going to do that in a lot of different ways. Podcasting, live events, email newsletters, books. I'm agnostic when it comes to spreading your message. I do what works, and I'm going to help you do what works. Eric Moth is my guest for this episode. Have you ever been to a dinner party and there's some guy there and he's got a really interesting job? I think Eric Moth is an interesting example of somebody like that. He has made a career of something that if you had said this when you were a kid, I'm going to do this, people would think that you're crazy. I think we're all kind of looking for that, right? Something you really love and enjoy, and something you wouldn't necessarily think of as a career option. When I was a kid, I had this intercom system from Radio Shack that I found at a yard sale. I was maybe 5, 6 years old, set up my own radio station in my house. Nobody was listening. I didn't care. Didn't let that stop me from talking. And the upstairs bedroom, my studio, was broadcasting all the way downstairs. It was fun for me. And who would have imagined that I would go on to be on radio and be doing podcasting? I'm kind of doing this right now. I'm in a closet inside my house. Takes me way back in the 70s when I was a kid on that glorified baby monitor. This is something that I used to see a lot with musicians when I worked in the music industry. A lot of them didn't really believe that music business success was possible. They maybe jump in, try to kick the tires, but in their hearts, they really didn't believe it. But as somebody who grew up in Nashville, and as somebody who was working in the music business with people who had been successful and were successful, I knew it was possible. That is one of the reasons that I wanted to have Eric on. The chance of you doing the same thing that he is doing, I doubt it. I don't think you've got his job, but I think you're going to relate to him because it's going to show you the behind the scenes of building an expert business, an entertainment business, something that people are going to pay to see, pay you to come out for and entertain, pay you to come out to share your knowledge. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the business, but we're also going to talk about that mindset, knowing something is possible. He's a very interesting guy. He does it in an interesting way. We also talk about performance, how to make things happen when it counts, and what to do when it counts when you're not able to make things happen. Side note that we did this interview before COVID-19. Everything we talk about from a business sense still counts, though. Getting gigs, the rules of performance, building an audience. You just may have to do things a little bit differently. We can't get together in person now, but that's going to come back. It may come back slowly. It may come back quickly. I don't know. But what I know is that people love to get together, and we will all be in the same room eventually. When everybody else has given up on that, that is the time for you to dig in and be prepared for when that switch flips. Because it's going to happen. Again, we don't know. Could happen in 2 weeks, could happen in a month, could happen in a year. I want you to be ready for it, though. So here's my guest, Eric Moth. I'm going to kick it off with him explaining what he does.
When I tell people that I'm a strongman, what usually comes up in people's minds is the competitive strongman, like World's Strongest Men, like Brian Shaw, Eddie Hall, Robert Oberst. Those actually kind of came from a long-lost tradition of performing strongman, which is what I do. So basically, in a nutshell, I perform feats of strength as part of a live show. As an example, during my last show, breaking a lock that attached to shackles, breaking a chain with my chest, ripping apart a tennis ball that's meant for dogs, twisting a horseshoe, doing something called the one-handed human link, rolling up a frying pan, driving a nail through a wooden board by hand, bend a wrench, rip a deck of playing cards, and my finale feat is bending a reinforcing bar on the bridge of my nose. All this accompanies a motivational speech, which I've taken to high schools, colleges, Fortune 500 companies, associations, nonprofits, and basically anywhere that people want to see this sort of thing.
I'm going to dive all into this. First thing I want to do is I want to talk about what I think of when I think of strongman, because I think that's maybe where it starts. When you say strongman, I think of a guy in a leopard onesie, a shaved head, funky handlebar mustache with those barbells that have like the round globes on them. Way old school, vaudevillian kind of strongman. Is that an accurate description of this kind of performing strongman feats?
Yeah, pretty accurate, because, it's a weird thing. When I dive into the history of strongman, there's a lot that you can find about the history of magic, escape artistry, jugglers. These are all ancient traditions. And the strongmen are as well, but for whatever reason, information about it is hard to come by. I mean, we've seen photographs of those guys, the guys with the handlebar mustaches and the leopard print onesies. And those guys are typically found in circuses, but they were also in vaudeville variety theater, which is like the premier source for family entertainment back then. These guys were able to do amazing feats of strength in an era before steroids were even invented. I'm also a personal trainer by trade, and I simply wanted to learn these techniques because I'm like, the things that they're teaching could apply to me, and it could also apply to some of my personal training clients. There is a subculture of people who do this today, and I happen to have been taken into this subculture where I initially went just to interview them and ask them what the secrets were. During that conference where I met all these guys, one of them took me under their wing and basically taught me lessons of achievement that go far beyond bending steel but can apply to our lives and careers, hence why I've made it part of a motivational speech.
With that said, I work out at the gym, right? I can do pull-ups. I can lift heavy things, somewhat heavy things. How much of this is strength and how much of it is something else? Trickery, mindset, what is the balance there?
If I were to try to explain it in like a one-liner, once you understand that there is a power within you that can lift a car off of a human being, this has been demonstrated multiple times throughout history when people are put into life or death situations, mothers lifting cars up off of children, that sort of thing. Once you understand that fact, the rest is just progression, technique, and a willingness to go into that special place.
When you say that, there's a mental place, it sounds like.
Yeah.
How does that translate to other work that you do? We always hear the words peak performers or mindset. Is it something related to that, and can it be translated into other elements of your life?
Yeah. So as an example, my first mentor, New Jersey Superman, Greg Matonic, one day he gives me a piece of steel and he says, bend it. And I'm looking at this steel bar and I'm like, I can't do this, Greg. And he says, sure you can. I know you can. Problem is you don't know you can. So he takes me over to this bench, and this bench had a barbell that was suspended over it with chains. And he says, what you're going to do is you're going to lie down on the bench, you're going to close your eyes. I'm going to put some weight on each side, and you're just going to push it up a couple times. So I lie down on the bench, and I close my eyes, and he puts some weight on each side, and I push it up a couple times. No big deal. He puts a bit more weight on each side, and my eyes are still closed. I push it up, so on and so forth. And then when he gets to basically what is considered my upper limit, he says, open your eyes, and he points at the weight, and he's like, the amount of strength that it takes to lift up that weight is actually more that's needed to bend that piece of steel. But what's happening is because you don't believe that you can do it, you're not quite giving it your all, you're holding yourself back. Now you think about it, in our lives, let's say you're a guy, you want to date with a girl. Perhaps this girl could be the one that you end up marrying and spend the rest of your life with. But you think to yourself, oh, she'd never go out with a schlub like me. So you don't ask her, and when you don't take that chance at asking, nothing's going to come from it. And let's say you want to start a business, but then you start looking into all of these things that is going to be involved with starting a business, and it starts to overwhelm you, and you talk yourself out of doing it before you ever actually do it. That sort of thing happens to all of us at some point or another. My life has been a series of failed projects up until I came upon the Strongman. And most people will stop themselves before they even start something, just like I was doing with that piece of steel.
Something I'm curious about, and we can use the steel bending as an example. I feel like in life, it's one thing to do something, as I say, in the laboratory or practice something. A completely different thing to do it on stage. So you got your mentor there, you're working on bending steel. What is the difference there and the difference between doing it on stage for a performance when there seems to be so much pressure, a lot of people watching you? I mean, do you feel that kind of pressure when you're doing a performance?
Yes and no. I oftentimes actually get a lot of questions about public speaking. Like, why am I composed in front of audiences of like 500 people? And truth be told, it actually gives me more power when I'm in front of an audience. The way I can explain it is, when you are on stage, what people think is going on is they want you to fail, they're judging you, etc., etc. And I'm of the mindset that they're not there to see me fail, they're there to see me succeed. And even if, like, let's say a couple people in the audience want to see me fail, I'm not playing to them. I'm playing to the ones that want to see me succeed and the ones that actually really need to hear my message. Whenever you're on stage, there's a bit of an adrenaline hit. And that adrenaline hit can sometimes be crippling to people. But for me, I use it to put it into my feats.
It's funny you mentioned adrenaline, because I was thinking about that when you gave the example of a mother lifting a car off her child. What that is, that's focused use of adrenaline, and you're doing something very similar, it sounds like, when you're on stage.
Right. When that mother sees her kid under a car, something gets flipped in her brain. Her body starts secreting adrenaline, and that helps like give extra juice to the muscles, right? But there's nothing outside that's actually doing that to her. That's her body still secreting the adrenaline. Now, to an extent, you can do this to yourself. For me, when I'm on stage, that outside stimulus of seeing 500 people watching me does give me extra strength, but you can muster that up when you're by yourself in person. It's just not quite as easy. It takes a bit more focus. So actually being in front of people helps with that regard.
Let's talk about how you've made this happen. I'm curious how this became a business. It sounds like you were reporting, curious, asking these strong guys questions, and they taught you some tricks. You were doing the personal training thing. And when did you make the push to, get that first gig and start doing this for performance?
When I first started learning to be a strongman, I actually didn't even really go into it thinking that I was going to be a performer. I wanted to learn the secrets. I wanted to see what I was capable of. Now, the first time that I bent a steel bar on the bridge of my nose, my first mentor, New Jersey Superman Greg Matonic, he's like, "That's it. It's official. You're an old-time strongman." I was like, "Oh, great. Do you think I could do a show?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, how?" "You just got to find someone to pay you."
There you go.
So I was like trying to figure out how to put this thing into a show. And I was reaching out to magicians, and they were the ones teaching me basically how to connect my feats to the audience. And I also had figured putting a motivational message would be a really nice fit for my show. Because when I first started learning with my first mentor, I was going through a transitional period in my life. I was going through a divorce from my first wife and trying to look to rebuild myself as a person. So I was reading a lot of personal development books at the time, like Think and Grow Rich, classic personal development book. And I noticed that there were parallels. I'm like, man, this would go really well with a motivational speech. I also happen to have been a member of Toastmasters, which I didn't even join to learn public speaking. I went to it for networking for my personal training business. And after my first time bending steel, I go to my Toastmasters meeting and I give a speech called Nothing is Impossible. At that time, I was a really new member, and someone asked me to mentor them in public speaking. And I'm like, I only been doing this for like 2 weeks. I'm not the person to mentor you. So that seed was kind of planted in my head. And then I was looking at all of these other speakers and on YouTube trying to get an idea of like how to actually package this and put it in a way that makes sense instead of just a bunch of disjointed things. And I realized just how big of a market there was for this. Now, the first time I did a motivational speech where it was presented in a way that I was like, this is the way I'm going to do it, that was for a high school. They say high schools are a tough audience, but I don't think so. And I happened to be on the same bill as another highly respected youth speaker, and I got higher marks than them. Everything came together and it just made sense.
Well, you've got something really cool, I think, which is a demonstration. A lot of people, they talk about blowing hot smoke up your butt, like that kind of motivation, and it doesn't really land. And I think if you can give specific stories, so that would be the first thing. But the second thing, again, the demonstration, that's huge. That's huge, and so few speakers do that. And I think that's something any expert could learn from. If you can show what you do and show that it's real, and that could be past clients, that could be maybe stories that you tell from working with people. But when you're out there and you've got rebar and you're bending on your nose, I guess there probably are skeptics, but you can't really deny that something's happening there.
There's skeptics. There's going to be skeptics in every show, but I look at that as actually a positive. They don't believe that what I'm doing is real. Why? Because it's unbelievable. It wouldn't be unbelievable if everybody believed it.
I'm curious if you sell that. Do you sell that a little bit? I know you mentioned magicians. One of the things that a professional juggler will do just to add an element of danger is to drop the pins right before they start juggling chainsaws. Just to remind people that, hey, I make this look really easy, but this is actually really dangerous. So they do that on purpose. Do you have any things like that just to make it so it doesn't look so easy so people don't think that it's fake? Like I said, what are the tricks? Are there tricks to doing this kind of thing? And you're saying, well, yeah, maybe, but it's also a mindset. It's a legitimate thing.
There's techniques, just like anything. Anything done at a high level is going to have techniques. But as far as like purposefully putting things in there that I like purposefully failing, no, I don't need to do that on purpose. It happens enough without it being intentional.
Tell me a story of failing on stage, like you're trying to blow up a hot water bottle and doesn't work.
Before I packaged my motivational speech the way I do, where it's like a full hour show, one of my magician friends had been booked for like an hour and a half for a high school assembly. Hour and a half is a long time. He knew I was an up-and-comer and I was hungry for work, and he's like, would you like to provide an intermission for me? Just break it up a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be awesome. So I prepared this speech in my head called Nothing's Impossible. And I get up on stage, I introduce myself, and break a chain, and it wasn't a problem. Bend a steel bar wasn't a problem. Twist a horseshoe, easy. And I'm like rocking and rolling, and everything is just flying by. And then I pull out a wrench. Problem. This wrench had been tempered. With what I do, weight is constant. But since I'm using like bending steel, there's always variance in materials. And they have to bring it to like a minimum level of strength, but there's no maximum that I'm aware of. You never really know what you're going to get. And the brother to this wrench in the packet had gone no problem. That went easy in a practice session, but this wrench was tempered. So I put some power on a wrench, enough where it would normally go. That's weird. Let me try this again. So I put more power on it, and I held it for a bit longer, and still nothing happened. I'm like, uh-oh. Then I put as much power as I could, and I held it for as long as I could, and the room starts to go black. And I know if I keep going, I'm going to pass out. So I go to the audience. I'm like, this wrench is putting up more of a fight than I anticipated. I could keep going with this if you want, but I have no idea how long it's going to take. Or I could just move on to the next feat. What do you guys want? And everybody just said, oh, just move on to the next feat. It's fine. So I was like, whew, because it's getting really tired. Next feat happened to be rolling up a bunch of frying pans, and people seemed to really like the frying pans. So I was able to get the audience back on my side, but I was like beating myself up on the inside because I'm like, I had prepared this speech called Nothing's Impossible, but I had to change it to Nothing's Impossible except for that wrench. That was in one of my first and biggest shows. Now it turns out that I use that story in just about every single one of my motivational speeches since, at least the full ones. Because I learned a couple things from that. One, honesty and integrity first and foremost, because, yeah, I could have guaranteed it would break if I tampered with it ahead of time. But the other thing I learned is sometimes you bite off just a bit more than you can chew. Sometimes whatever it is you're going after puts up more of a fight than you anticipated. And it's okay to fail. Every single one of us is going to fail at some point. At some time or another. If you ever start a business or you ever ask someone out, You're going to get shot down. Sometimes your business is going to go down in flames. But the key is to keep on trying. Because with that particular wrench, I brought it home and it sat on my coffee table, metaphorically taunting me for about 6 months. And then a couple days before Christmas, I say, "Wrench, guess what? Tonight's the night. One of us is going to break. Either you're going to break, or I'm going to rip off my thumbs trying." Wrench didn't say anything back because, it's a wrench. But it took me an hour in my living room screaming like a well-adjusted adult. But I got it. And then I was able to give it as a gift to my parents.
Yeah. Well, I love it that you've actually got this stuff into your show. I think it's interesting that like the things that we think would be failure or the things that we think won't work can actually help the things that do. And in this case, I think the fact that people know after you haven't broken it that the next one may or may not work, that kind of energizes them and they're paying more attention. So it's not just like, this guy's going to break everything on here. There's like an element of, will this work or will it not? Which I think is super stimulating to people. That actually could help your show, I would think.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I put it in there. Sometimes, like, there'll be a particular style of wrench that sometimes I get it, most of the time I don't. And I'm like, I don't really know if this is going to go until I try. And that's kind of the same thing when it comes to any business you want to start. You won't know until you try. There's like another speaking point there,
You mentioned getting those first gigs. Like you got a buddy, he says, hey, fill in for intermission. What about the current gigs? How is it that you're getting booked? Is it a cold call thing? Is it based on your reputation now? Are people coming to you? Do people ever come to you? I'd love to know what you're doing to keep the flow of gigs happening.
A lot of it has been through reach out. When I first started wanting to bring it to high schools, I picked up a tip, and this was like literally like a couple days before I got married. Who do I reach out to? And then once I figured that out, I just blasted every high school in the state of New Jersey. Hey, who hires speakers, yada, yada, yada. Did the same thing with middle school and elementary schools because I figured this is like low-hanging fruit. There's a school in every town. The kids need to hear this sort of thing too. So a lot of it was just planting those initial seeds. Having moved into the college and corporate market, I have booking assistants that do my reach outs for me. This way, like I've got 2 kids. My daughter's 2.5 and my younger daughter is 3 months. And I know that these times are fleeting. So I found myself like procrastinating doing the reach outs because, truth be told, I'd rather play with my daughters. So I hire someone else to do it. And this way I can also ensure that it's getting done. That all they do is just look up events, reach out to them. Look up events, look up colleges, look up high schools, reach out to them.
Let's talk about that process. You've got guys that are researching for you, and the way they do the reach out, that's via email? Or did they make calls? How does that work?
They initially reach out through email, just asking about the event, who would hire either speakers or entertainers. And then if the people respond back and they sound halfway interested, then they forward it to me, and then I take over from there to get some information. So it's like they'll ask them questions and then I'll talk to them just to kind of make sure we're on the same page and make sure I actually am a good fit for their event before putting together a proposal and taking it from there.
How many people do you think that they reach out to in order to hear from one person who's kind of interested?
It's like 1 out of 100.
There's a lot of outreach there. I guess you've got a video, because people would say like, hey, let me see this in action. So that would be important, I would think.
Yes, I have a demo video on like the front page of my website. It's like when I get the client's information, like about their event, about their audience, etc., what it is that they're looking for, assuming that what I do is a match, I create a proposal that basically says how what I do is going to solve whatever their issue is. Basically showing that they've got a round hole, I'm a round peg.
That's based on the type of event that it is. If there's an organized event, you do a custom proposal? Okay.
Yeah, for the most part, my presentation, 80% of it stays the same, and then it's that 20% that gets customized to whatever that they're looking for. So I really got to make sure that what I do is going to fit, because I'm not a chameleon. The thing that I do is, that 80% is trench tested and proven over 100 shows. And then I'll create a proposal page for that person that'll also have letters of recommendation that I've picked up from some of my corporate, college, nonprofit, depending on who that is. Like if it's a youth group, I'll provide the letters of testimony from youth groups. If it's corporate, I'll provide letters of recommendation from corporations I've worked with. And then I'll also have footage from a full show so that they can see exactly what they're getting.
Is there an element of curiosity when people write you back? Because I would be curious about it. You say, hey, I'm a strong man. Or I don't know how you phrase it exactly. I would be like instantly into that. All right, tell me more. It seems like it's a pretty good hook for when you're reaching out, other than just like, hey, I'm a motivational speaker. We hear that all the time, and I'm not even in that business. But how many strongmen do you meet? It seems like a great opportunity to have people be curious and reach back to you.
Being a strongman, it does give me a certain reputation amongst just about everybody, not just the event planners. Like, people hear what I do and then they start like using that name and like strongman instead of my actual name. And I'm like, oh, please, I put my pants on both legs at a time just like everybody else.
Yeah. When I was in the music industry, which I was for years and years, a lot of bands, when they needed work or having downtime, they would do something called NACA, which is, I guess, National Association of Campus Activities. And one of the things that would frustrate just a straight musician was that you were competing with the somewhat novelty acts, the sword swallowers, jugglers, guys who play with laser beam. Who knows? I mean, there was all sorts of really cool stuff that you would see at a NACA show. And it seems like if you've got one of those things, it's just a great foot in the door. It's like, it almost like it sneaks in that motivational message. So you're still maybe a motivational speaker underneath, or there's a foundation of motivation to do what you do. But the strongman is a nice delivery mechanism that kind of sneaks it in on people. They think they're getting one thing and they come out with something so much more.
Yeah. When I tell people about what I do, I'm like, it's equal parts entertainer and inspirational speaker. Inspirational speaking is telling stories that have a message to them. And then I can punctuate my stories with feats of strength, because like the stories are me learning feats of strength and how I was able to do it, the things that I learned. So it is packaged in a way like that, where I typically do like between 10 and 14 feats a show with full stories of how I came to be doing this and the things that allow me to set my world record, et cetera, et cetera.
Is that exhausting?
Yeah, it can be. So this past July, it was my busiest month. I had 14 gigs, and 12 of them were in the same week.
Oh, gosh.
Which was, yeah, it was a long week.
Yeah.
I would get up in the morning and I'd drive over to there, and all of the shows at the time were in the afternoon. Set up, do my show, pack up, head over to the next place. Luckily, the next place was within a 10-minute drive. Set up, do my show, pack up, head off to the next place, set up, do my show, pack up, head home. And that was 6 days that week. And then when Sunday rolled around, I'm dead. My wife was in her third trimester. She's like, why are you tired? You're not even pregnant. I'm like, do one of my feats and see how tired you are. And then multiply that by between 10 and 13, 12 times this week.
This is not trickery, as we talked about. This isn't like the steel just breaks because you fixed it ahead of time. The phone books aren't pre-ripped. I mean, you're actually having to exert energy to do this.
That particular week, I think the wrenches, I only got maybe half of them. Stupid wrenches.
How long do you think you're going to be able to do this? Have you thought ahead, like, to retirement or for what's next? Because I just know, as I mentioned, going to the gym, when I hit 30, I was like, well, it's not as easy as it used to be. And then when I hit 40, that's not as easy as it used to be. And as time has gone on every year, I'm like, oh man, I don't know how much longer I've got just a general even workout in me. And then to think about what you're doing at this level, is it something you can continue for the rest of your life? Or how does that usually work as strongmen age?
Oh, I've got a story for you. So back when I was an up-and-comer, the one who initially told me the story about the power within, like mothers lifting cars off of kids, was a legendary strongman named Slim the Hammerman Farman. Now, Slim is like one of the last links to the past. His mentor was a vaudeville-era strongman named the Mighty Atom. The Mighty Atom was about my size and could do things like bite through chains and spikes, and was the one that like really spoke of the mindset of the strongmen. So Slim was mentored by him. A couple years back, when I was an up-and-comer, my friend, the Iron Tamer David Whitley, texted me. He's like, "You want to go to an old man's birthday party?" He had asked me how far I was from Pottsville, Pennsylvania. That's where Slim lives. And I'm like, I know, there's only one old man that I know in Pottsville, and that was going to be Slim the Hammerman Farman, and they were planning an 80th birthday for him. We go and surprise Slim. He had no idea it was coming. This is his 80th birthday, mind you. When he was in his prime, that was like in his 30s and 40s, he had mentioned that he would still be able to do his signature feat, which was levering a 20 or 24 pound sledgehammer at the end of a 31-inch handle. I think it was 24 pounds. So he had made this claim way back when, that he would still be able to do that on his 80th birthday. Now someone remembered that, called him out on it, and we're in his training area, also known as the dungeon. So he goes through his standard protocol of bringing someone up to attempt a feat. He asks for a volunteer. Like when the teacher asks someone to help, everybody like looks away, they try to be invisible. And me as an up-and-comer, I was trying to do this too, because even though I've got a world record, I've done 100 some odd shows, some part of me feels like I'm not worthy of being part of this community. And I think that that's just going to be one of those things that's always there. So I look away, try to make myself invisible, and my friend, the Iron Tamer David Whitley, is like, sees what I'm doing. He's like, "I think you should pick Eric." So I'm like, "Damn it, Dave." So Slim calls me up. The challenge hammer was a 12-pound sledgehammer at the end of a 31-inch handle. Now I'm here and I'm like, I'm an up-and-comer. I gotta show these guys I belong here. So I look at that handle and I'm like, I'm gonna make this happen. And I really did try to make it happen. And I'm pretty strong. I was, I think, 31 at the time. And I really did try. I couldn't get it. I have gotten it since then, but that day I couldn't do it. So here comes this 80-year-old man. And he takes that hammer away and he replaces it with a 24-pound sledgehammer. Twice what I failed at. And then he does it. No problem. 80-year-old man doing this. And he's not the only one either. You hear Jack LaLanne pulling 70 boats on his 70th birthday.
Yeah.
And Mike Greenstein on America's Got Talent. Mike Greenstein was actually one of the sons of the Mighty Atom, pulling a car with his teeth in his 90s. That same guy, I also happened to have bent a steel bar in the bridge of his nose. I was one of the ones selected to help with that because I knew exactly what's going on with this. I've never been so scared in my life doing a feat as I was helping Mike Greenstein with his, because I'm like, 93-year-old man hasn't done this in about 40 years. What could possibly go wrong? He did it. It's almost like age doesn't affect the strongman. It's unbelievable.
We talked about vaudeville and being in the music industry. I used to be in Memphis, and there's an old guy, Rufus Thomas, that some people will remember. Way, way old school. Rufus came out on stage one time for a show, and he was on a walker. Old man, right? Looked like an old man. And that music started up, kicked that walker to the side, did his thing. Unbelievable. Looked like a young man. Music stopped, got back on that walker, screeched to the side of the stage. And I don't think it was an act. I just think he got in that mind where he was able to pull it out one more time,
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting to see that kind of thing. And I think when you love what you do, and certainly Jack LaLanne was an example of that. I mean, Jack LaLanne, people don't realize that he's the guy who started like the fitness on TV craze.
Mm-hmm.
He was really big into health. He used to have a funny saying. He said, if it tastes good, don't eat it. So I don't know if I completely agree with that. Vegetarian myself, there's plenty of vegetarian food I think that tastes great, but he was really great about nutrition. He was great about mindset. He was great about so many things, I think. Start wrapping this up here. You mentioned all these guys with cool nicknames. What's your cool nickname?
A nickname, not an official stage name, is Last Son of Krypton. Can't use that as an official one because that's licensed by DC. I've been considering lately, it's like one of my takeaways is don't focus on the immovable object, focus on being the unstoppable force. I was thinking about making that a stage name, the Unstoppable Force. That's all speculation at this point. Right now, I just go by Eric Moss.
And the website, it's strongmanericmoss.com. You've got the videos there. You've got information on how to book you. Eric, I appreciate you being here today because I think it's interesting not only to talk about the mindset of it, but to talk about something that people would, like if you were growing up, as a kid, like, I want to be a strong man. And people are like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. So there's like an interesting career there. And I think you've shown how you can take an interesting career, make money at it, but also how you started it out. And it's getting people to vouch for you, developing that reputation, getting those referral letters and building upon what you've got, and each gig getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, 12 in 1 week. And I guess you'd have to probably say yes to opportunity to do that as well. So there's another lesson there that say yes.
When I was a kid, I wasn't like especially athletic or anything like that. You wouldn't have looked at me and be like, that kid's going to have a career as a strongman when he's older. I can see it. I was the last one you'd ever expect to be doing that. But as far as like putting this together into a way that can make money, my approach is you just be really, really, really good at what you do. And I had figured, I'm like, if I can get my strength feats so good that it just blows people's minds, and if I can get the inspirational speaking part of it down to the point where even if I wasn't doing the feats, it would still be awesome, then when I combine the two of them, I'll be unstoppable. That's been kind of my focus.
Well, that's it in a nutshell. I think you're bringing that element of entertainment that so many people don't. So many experts, they think, well, I know facts and figures or I know stuff, but they don't bring that element of flair that it takes to really make the complete package. And when you've got it, I mean, look at some of our entertainment is to use a Jack LaLanne analogy, it's just junk food, right?
Yeah.
It tastes good, but it's not good for you. And I think when you can have entertainment with something that makes people feel good about themselves or they feel like they're a better person because of, that is an unstoppable force.
One of the things that I've started implementing recently is filming all of my shows and putting it into a vlog. One of the reasons that I did that is like, you see how popular reality television is, like things like Real Housewives of wherever. And these people are getting drunk and they're acting like idiots and people are just eating it up. And I'm like, if these people are into that, then they're going to get some kind of value from what I do. The way I also see it is like each time I do a vlog, it's kind of like a souvenir for people in the audience. They're like, hey, that's the time when he came to inspire us.
Coming from the music industry, that is something we used to use all the time. So if you're looking to build your mailing list, any speaker, any performer, what you can do is if you're professionally recording it or even if not, saying, all right, guys, I'm videotaping this tonight. This show is on video. Pass around the mailing list or do however you do your mailing list, text, call in, however people are doing it. And I will send you videos of this performance so you can share this with your friends. That's such an important point when it comes to building the list and building that connection with people. And then it gets them to do your marketing for you.
And you never know when you're going to get an awesome moment. They're like, oh, I'm glad I got that on video.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, if it's worth saying, it's worth recording. We say that in podcasting and in performing. If it's worth performing, also worth recording. Yeah, you never know. And once that moment is gone, you can't get it back. That's super important because I think you mentioned it like with the wrench. I mean, sometimes the things that you don't think will work actually work even when they don't work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, this has been so great to have you. It's strongmanericmoss.com. You're doing a lot of gigs, not as many as you were because of the family, so you've got the balance too. And I'm going to have you back and we'll talk more about the business of speaking and the business of balance and the business of being an expert. Thank you so much for being here on Red.
It was an honor for me to talk about myself.
Eric Moss on Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts. I'm going to have more thoughts on this interview, more thoughts about what Eric is doing, how you can do something very similar on the next episode. To make sure that you do not miss it, go to Big Podcast, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. You'll see I've got a few podcasts there. This one, Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts. We talk about this kind of thing all the time. Live events, book publishing, email newsletters. Basically, you going out, reaching, expanding, and developing your audience, building the big audience, expanding your expertise, growing your authority. So if you're interested in more about that, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there right now before you forget. If you're on an Android, hit the Android button. Use an iPhone. Hey, hipster, hit that iPhone button. And I got an old-fashioned RSS for you. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I will see you there, and I will see you on the next episode of Red Podcast.